Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. My name is Andres Franco. I'm the Deputy Director of the Public Partnerships Division based in New York, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all to this clinic on the Voluntary National Review for creating a child-sensitive and child-inclusive VNR. We welcome today many of our national committees around the world, some of our country offices in Eastern and Central Europe, and we also have some colleagues joining in from Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. So quite diverse, and this makes us very happy. Today, just so that you all know, we have translations in French, Spanish, and also Russian. And so you are very welcome to click on the icon at the bottom of your screen and click the translation that you wish to have if you haven't done that yet. So why are we here today? And I guess the question is basically connected to the fact that we're already 6 years into the SDGs. So if you think of 2030, we are more or less a third of the way to that really critical date. And unfortunately, the progress in many of the indicators, particularly those related to children, is not at the same level. So we know that there's a lot to do. And this has been accentuated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course has had a number of quite catastrophic and devastating impacts in health, in education, in protection systems around the world, and pretty much has had an impact in most of the targets around the SDGs. So we have a lot of work to do, and this means that we really need to take full advantage of the VNR process so that we make our really strong contribution to obtaining the SDGs. In 2022, we have 46 countries that will present their VNR at the next high-level political forum. So today's clinic is basically to empower and to facilitate that preparatory process. That's why we hope that today will be for you a practical experience, that it will be informative and that you can share with other colleagues, and hopefully that you can be inspired to just come up with a good VNR that will make a strong contribution for the SDGs. We have a number of stakeholders in the room today, so that makes it even more interesting. We have colleagues from governments, we have colleagues from civil society organizations, some at community level. We have colleagues from the private sector, young people with us, and many other stakeholders that really want to join this journey today. Now, our agenda is quite packed, so I want to move on so that we can have the best possible session. And right now, I would like to give the floor to Lucian. Lucian, you may wonder, is a youth representative from the National Youth Council of Moldova. You know, he's someone we know well in UNICEF. The council in particular was leading the VNR process in Moldova in the year 2020. So it already comes with some lessons. And I hope that Lucian can share his experience as a young person in creating a more child-sensitive and child-inclusive VNR. So, Lucian, I'm giving it over to you. You're very welcome.
Yeah, so good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucian Cojocaru, and I'm a volunteer at the National Youth Council of Moldova. And I'm very honored to greet you on behalf of the youth sector of Moldova. I'm pleased to stand here to present our efforts and experience in the voluntary national review process in which Moldova engaged in 2020. And I would like to present the national campaign Youth of Moldova for SDGs experience to make youth voice present in the VNR process and the results achieved. The national campaign Youth of Moldova for SDGs was organized by the National Youth Council of Moldova in partnership with UNICEF, UNFPA, and the government of Moldova and other partners. The aim of the campaign was to promote the global goals among youth and to involve them in the monitoring of the SDGs and actively participate in the first Moldova's VNR process in 2020. So the main campaign activities organized were as follows. Firstly, we had a national youth conference in which nearly 90 youths participated. Secondly, we organized informational workshops in 22 local districts on SDGs and the promotional on social media, and also youth promoting SDGs on social media. And lastly, we organized national contest entitled Media Ambassadors for SDGs. During a photo competition, the young people were very active in presenting their vision on the importance of SDGs localization in their own communities. Firstly, we organized regional consultations with young people. We launched U-Report polls on the VNR and another online consultation in order to make the voices of youth present in youth reports of SDGs implementation. The youth report of SDGs was complementary report to the governmental report. At the same time, we ensured that youth messages were integrated in the governmental reports submitted to the UN. Secondly, we organized a conference to present the report of young people and the Media Ambassadors Gala for global goals. And lastly, we participated in VNR Lab, where once again, we presented youth perspectives and priorities for SDGs localization in Moldova. So by taking the above mentioned actions, Moldova's youth made their voices heard worldwide. Within this campaign, we succeeded in aligning the government of Moldova's objectives with our campaign's objectives. As a result, we had good collaboration and openness with government in ensuring that youths were part of VNR evaluation process. The VNR is a mechanism which I consider vital to evaluate the evaluation and impact of volunteerism on social justice. During the VNR process, I learned that each volunteer is unique. Each volunteer has its own background, but they have one simple yet complicated goal: to make Earth a better place. And VNRs helps us to enrich communities socially, also culturally and educationally. It also helps us to build bonding between neighbors and find what gaps we had in justice of society, and also how we can fix it. In the last few years, teens have shown the most iconic acts of courage to fight and get involved in the changing process of society. Sometimes we want to make a change, but we don't know where to start off or how we should make this change. And the VNR process helps us to get involved, to identify the problems and to identify the solutions. As a conclusion of the national campaign of Youth Moldova for SDGs, I can say that many young people still don't know what about SDGs. Some young people already knew about the SDGs, but at the same time, young people have not developed skills for participation and promotion of the SDGs. We also encountered interesting discussions where young people have highlighted the issues they face every day in education, health, well-being, inclusion, equality, and sustainable communities. Young people consider that they do not have so many opportunities here in Moldova, and this motivates them to emigrate. Some of them consider that our state institutions do not involve young people in significant decision-making processes. Last but not least, there are many active young people who are involved in the development of their communities. They write projects, they plant trees, participate in sanitation activities, and so on. So despite all difficulties, by this pandemic outbreak, the National Youth Council of Moldova reaffirms its commitment to make the voices of youth in Moldova heard, both at the national and international level. But for greater intervention of youth and youth organizations and local communities, for monitoring the process of SDGs, it is important that we have government support in this process, including by ensuring access to financial resources. So thank you everyone for your work and efforts to strengthen the youth voice in the world, and please remain committed to continue and promote these SDGs and youth rights in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good, Lucian, very good. And very, very critical messages on the, what the VNR meant for young people in terms of inputting and shaping, and also very good at outlining, the role of governments in allowing youth participation. So excellent. I'm very happy with and very impressed with the sharp messages that you have sent, and I think they will be very useful for colleagues. Okay, we will move on now to the next part, and we have a little bit of an exercise with my colleagues in UNICEF because, as you know, we're very committed to making sure that the VNRs are outstanding when it comes to a child rights perspective, and we want to do everything possible. And when I talk to my colleagues who know all the technical details, they all want their part reflected in the VNR. So I told them, okay, if you want your part reflected in the VNR, you have to come and pitch it. And we have selected 6 areas which are really crucial for all of you to remember. And we have experts for each one of these areas that I will mention in a second. And they will have 2 or 3 minutes to pitch to you why that area could be very important for the VNR. So what are these 6 areas? And remember them because these will also be the works that we will be working in. So the first one is the realization of child rights as a critical foundation to achieving the SDGs. So my colleague Manel from the Human Rights Unit will be pitching to you on this one, number 1. Number 2, investing in children through public financing and combating child poverty. That's number 2. And we will have Sola and Jennifer pitch to you this one. Number 3, cultivating meaningful child and youth awareness, engagement, and action. And here we have Kate, who will be presenting to you. And number 4, the importance of collection, analysis, and use of disaggregated data. And I know Mark, who we will meet soon, will present on this one. Number 5, climate change and environmental degradation as a child rights issue. And we have Moa. And finally, business, children, and the SDGs. How can we engage the private sector to advance children's rights and achieve the SDGs will be Nazila. So in that order, I will give them the floor so that they can provide their pitch to you as to why each one of these areas should be central in the VNR. Pay attention to them because after that, when we break you up in rooms, you will have to select to which group you want to go. So listen to the pitch, and then you will have more instruments to decide where you want to go first. So let's go to number 1, realization of child rights as a critical foundation to achieving the SDGs. And Manel, the floor is yours, and we're all ears.
Great, thank you very much, Andres. Thank you for the opportunity to present. So I'm Manel Stambouli. I work with the Human Rights Unit in program group based in New York. So I'll be focusing on child rights and the SDGs. So first of all, I want to recall that the SDGs do explicitly seek to realize
Manel, you're on mute, I think.
Okay, apologies for that. I don't know when I started to be muted, so I'll restart again. So my name is Manal Stambouli. I work with the Human Rights Unit based in New York, and I'll be speaking about child rights and the SDGs. So really pleased to be here today. So first of all, I want to recall that the SDGs do explicitly seek to realize the human rights of all. When we say that, that means that we also include children's rights that are also human rights, and that tends to be often forgotten. So attention to children's rights across all of the SDG goals is really critical to the achievement of the goals, even those that do not explicitly reference children. And I think that's a message that we want to take away here. And I want to back up my presentation using a report that was issued last year by the Secretary General of the UN, and which focused on child rights and the SDGs, so very relevant to our discussion today. So the report recalls that there's been wide-ranging progress over the past decade in legislation, policies, and practices dedicated to the realization of children's rights, including within the framework of the 2030 Agenda. However, it's also starkly evident that children continue to face ongoing child rights violations, persistent and systematic discrimination and inequalities that have been deepened by the pandemic, by the impact of climate change and environmental degradation, as well as by ongoing humanitarian crisis. And those children who are already the most discriminated against and marginalized, those that remain invisible, are certainly those that tend to still further to be the most left behind. So basically, what's needed is really to address the situation of those children that are in the most desperate situations, if we really are to collectively support the realization of all the rights of all children and the ambitions overall of the 2030 Agenda. So in terms of what to do in relation to the upcoming VNRs, I think there are some few key messages that I'd like to share already with you today. One is to ensure that we report on all children's rights during the VNR-related processes. So looking at it from a very comprehensive manner, focusing on the full spectrum of child rights, social, economic, cultural, but also political and civil rights for children, using the framework of the CRC, which is at the end, the most comprehensive statement of children's rights ever produced and the most widely ratified treaty in history. And also remember that all the SDGs are relevant to the fulfillment of the rights of children, not just those that are explicitly referencing children. Another message I want to share also with you today is the importance to leverage existing reporting mechanisms when preparing for the VNR. So using, for instance, reporting that has been prepared towards the international human rights mechanisms, such as the CRC, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, but also using and leveraging the engagement at country level with national human rights institutions, and those that are dedicated also to child rights. So really important to leverage those existing mechanisms. And finally, I think that's also a key one, and that's building on Lucian's excellent presentation. So it's really looking into recognizing the role that children play, but also their right to be heard in matters that affect them. And for that, to make sure that you conduct meaningful and inclusive consultations with children throughout the SDG-related processes. Thank you. And also expand children's awareness of their rights and of the SDGs, including through child rights education. So ultimately, it's evident that a child rights approach is critical to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and its pledge to leave no one behind, and that the realization of children's rights remains a cornerstone of SDG implementation. Thank you. Over.
Okay, thank you, Manal. Very strong points linking the SDG and child rights. Very clear, so good pitch. Let's go to the second pitch, and this is Sola and Jennifer, investing in children through public financing and combating child poverty. I will let you know when you have 1 minute left. Sola, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Good morning from us. I guess it's good evening for many. We have a little bit of a PowerPoint, so do let me know if you can see it. Yeah, good morning. My name is Sola, and I'm here with my colleague Jenny, and we work in the social policy and social protection section at UNICEF. And we are here today to pitch on goal number 1, the goal that cuts across all the SDGs, and that is ending poverty in all its forms. And we want to give some tips on how you can reflect on this important goal in your VNR process. And in particular on these 3 indicators, which I'm going to cover. It's on the proportion of the population living below the national poverty line, and the importance of disaggregating this for children, which is an SDG requirement. And then the proportion of men, women, and children living in poverty in all its dimensions, including multidimensional poverty. And then finally, indicator 1.3.1 on the proportion of the population covered by social protection floors. And these are all crucial indicators of SDG goal number 1. So in the support package, I believe you have received from Annalisa and Shannon, you will see our key asks. And I really encourage you to take a look at that. It's quite comprehensive. So I'm just going to go quickly through these, but our key ask for all of you today who are, in the process of preparing your VNRs and presenting them in July, is that you very clearly outline how you have measured and monitored child poverty, both monetary and multidimensional. It would be lovely to see in all the VNRs how you have prioritized child poverty in your national development agenda. So including how you're monitoring and tracking progress in ending child poverty. We hope to see there the importance of expanding child-sensitive and inclusive social protection with a focus on disability and gender, for example, and how children are reached through these programs, and in particular, those furthest behind. We hope to see there the importance of investing in quality services for children, including those marginalized, how they're accessing health, education, nutrition, and so forth. And on the 5th point on safeguarding social spending, Jenny, my colleague, will mention a bit more on that. And for all these last points on expanding child-sensitive social protection, investing in quality services, and safeguarding social spending, we would really hope to see how governments have responded in terms of COVID, what were the measures put in place, and how are they going to sustain these measures now that we're heading into fiscal constraint environments. So these are our key asks, but they're not only our key asks. We actually do analyze every year, and this will be the 4th year that we analyze this as a global coalition to end child poverty. And I see Arilis is here from World Vision, for example. So it's a coalition of different organizations, including UNICEF, where we actually look at each and every VNR report and see how are children in poverty reflected in these reports. And at the end of the brief, and we can share the brief with you, is a traffic light of countries. So it's in green and red, and green is good, red is bad. So we hope this year all the countries will be in green. But we don't only put countries on the spot, we also really celebrate the countries that clearly outline and clearly highlight and put the spotlight on children in poverty in the VNRs. So it's also a celebration of the good work done. So we really look forward to seeing all the VNRs in 2022 and see how children in poverty are reflected in these. But I'm going to hand now over to my colleague Jenny, and she's going to talk a bit more about this safeguarding social spending part.
Thank you, Sola. So
you have 1 minute.
I have 1 minute. All right.
Yeah.
I will ask for a minute and a half, and I'll go as quickly as I can, because obviously financing is a key challenge in the COVID context, given the economic element of the crisis, and prioritizing and protecting investment in this context is even more important. So the VNRs are an opportunity for governments to report on these financing challenges and how they've been able to protect investment in essential social services. So we have a lot of good examples for how this was done in previous years. You're particularly focusing on how governments have been able to expand and protect universal health coverage, or ensure that education resources reach vulnerable populations who are excluded from remote education. I've put up here the list of indicators that we are looking at to demonstrate progress on key social sector financing. But of course, financing is a means of achieving all the SDGs, as Manil mentioned, not just those that specifically focus on children or social investments. But here we have indicator 1.A1, which links directly to the poverty reduction programs, as Sola mentioned. 1.A2, which is a major focus, which again, Sola did bring this up, that your spending on essential services is critical in relation to multidimensional poverty, but it's also critical as an investment in human capital and the rights of children. 1.B.1 brings out this essential equity element, no child left behind. And 16.6.1 brings out these critical governance issues of budget credibility. So not just making a commitment in plans and budgets, but being able to execute that in spending. Next slide, please, very, very quickly. So as mentioned, there is a support package that includes a number of key asks. And this is, I mean, we really encourage governments to include these in their VNRs. And the VNR process itself is an opportunity for dialogue. So we also encourage dialogue on how to measure these issues and reflect on the underlying financing issues and how they're presented. But the particular points that we're emphasizing here is obviously ensuring adequate financing and how governments have been able to protect social spending in the COVID context. We've spoken about health, education, social protection as these key social investments, but it's not just these single sectors, it's also the cross-sectoral issues, child poverty, early childhood development, nutrition. So being able to identify these investments that cut across more than one government ministry, more than one goal. This critical issue of equity, so equity gap analysis to understand if children are being left behind. Looking beyond just how much was invested and looking at results. And of course, there's a lot of public finance tools we can use to report on that. And then finally, this point on really transparency and accountability, encouraging public participation and tracking. We will have a breakout room, so more opportunity to talk about this in more detail. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you, Jenny. Sorry for pushing you with the time, but both of you did a great job in making the point of how critical it is to have real budget allocations and analysis of this. So let's move on to the third pitch. This is Kate, and she's going to be talking about cultivating meaningful child and youth awareness, engagement, and action on the SDGs. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you so much. Let me just pull up one slide that I have to help us. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. My name's Kate, and I'm a youth engagement specialist in UNICEF's Global Division of Communication and Advocacy. And as I'm sure you've already felt from today's conversations, at UNICEF, we believe that children not only have a right to participate in sustainable development and the decisions that impact them, but we really believe that child and youth participation improves these decisions and therefore development outcomes. Now, the SDGs ushered in an unprecedented level of participation when it came to the design of the goals, engaging millions of people, and there was a massive participation of children and youth, which really shows the desire to be involved in development and decisions that impact them. And now that we're several years into the process of implementing the goals, it's critical that inclusion and participation remains top of mind and a priority for us. And the VNR is one key opportunity for engaging children and young people. And we've seen really great examples of this over the last few years. It's really important that it's not just about children's voices. It's not just about children's issues being heard, but also hearing from children, their views, their ideas, and incorporating these into the SDG monitoring process. Now, I have kind of 4 simple steps, which of course we could spend a whole day discussing about where there's opportunities to engage children and young people in the VNR process. And I'll take you through those in the next few minutes. The very first one is around education on the SDGs and child rights. If children are not aware of their rights and if they're not aware of the SDGs, it's very hard for them to participate and to claim their rights. And there's tools and platforms like the World's Largest Lesson, which UNICEF co-founded, which can help with this. And again, we're happy to always provide more information. Then moving into the actual VNR process itself, one of the key stages is consulting children and young people in the VNR process. And very importantly, this is not just about listening to children, but really giving due consideration to their ideas and their perspectives. There's many different formats that consultations can take place in. They can be workshops, forums, focus groups. There can be online platforms and surveys using UNICEF tools like YouReport, and they can also include children commenting on VNR reports. In terms of consultations, it's really important children and young people are not a homogeneous group, so really key to involve as many diverse groups as possible. Now, moving very quickly, another area where there's opportunity for engagement and participation is the preparation of the VNR report itself. It's really critical that if this is something that you're going to pursue, to dedicate the necessary time and resources to do this, and to really make sure that the process is child and youth friendly. And on this, I'd really like to encourage and challenge everyone to think about how creativity can be incorporated and how we can move from the traditional PDF 50 pages report idea into something that will also bring, create more opportunity for children and young people to participate. And finally, 1 minute. All right. Finally, there's the HLPF presentation itself. We've seen examples of delegations, including children and young people, to speak and present. Very important that whoever is selected to be part of this is really properly supported so that it's a meaningful, safe, and empowering experience. And also important that they have been involved in the process beforehand so that they can speak with some measure of representation of other children and youth who are, of course, not able to all be at the presentation. Finally, in my last few seconds, two really, really important principles to keep in mind. I already mentioned that children and young people are not homogeneous, but really in this process, we need to try go deeper and reach those children and young people who usually don't have opportunities to participate, those who are vulnerable, marginalized, younger children. And then finally, it's really important that none of this is once-off and disconnected. This really needs to be part of a push to institutionalize child and youth participation in decision-making. Thank you very much.
Good job, Kate. I think you and Lucien, maybe you guys coordinated before. Very strong alignment between the two of you, so fantastic. Okay, Mark, data number 4, the importance of collection, analysis, and use of disaggregated data. So Mark, 3 minutes to you to pitch.
3 minutes. Yes, all of us love what we're doing. And of course, we can all speak for 30 minutes minimum. So do come to the breakout rooms later if you want to know more. Let's skip through these things. You're hearing from all of us about how the issues we're bringing to you cut across all of the SDGs. And even if some of them are tied to particular indicators, they're issues that cut across all the SDGs. And so, of course, I'm going to say the same thing. Without data, without the power of data, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to highlight innovations in your VNR, to highlight successes, and of course to bring a spotlight onto challenges, shall we say, opportunities. If you're trying to do those without data, then it will be even waving your hands more than I'm waving my hands now. So grounding what you want to say in clearly presented data is going to be enormously powerful as you work your way through all of the different issues, including the ones that my colleagues have been highlighting. And I've got 3 things to say. So one is to use existing data, and that might sound really stupid, and of course you'll use existing data, but in fact a lot of the time when we come to write, we don't know of all the different data sources, we don't know of all the different analysis that has been done, and quite often data we think are missing, or data that we can't at least imply through other data sources pass us by. So be encouraged to look for data, and of course, as we're bringing this in, to look for data around children across the SDGs. And children, not just because we're UNICEF and not just because we love children, but because it's an important part of the SDGs, is to make sure nobody is left behind. And children can be overlooked in data systems and can be overlooked in reports. And so we need to make sure that we're finding the data that exists around children and the SDGs. Some people read tables, some people read text, some people look at pictures. So you need to present data in all those three ways. And I just want to say visually, if you're presenting something, only try and make one point. Have a simple graphic to make one point. Don't get too, let it get too complicated and out of hand. Don't let us data nerds, make it too complex. And do look across all different kinds of sources. There are official statistics. There are official government systems which may not contribute to statistics all of the time. So there are administrative data systems. There are periodic surveys that ministries may be doing. And,
minute,
now,
Mark.
of course, we have a lot of big data to be able to add insights over and above official statistics. We need to disaggregate. We're already disaggregating if we're talking about children, but we need to disaggregate further between boys and girls, children with and without impairments that lead to disability, migratory statement, and so on. And if those data are not available in a disaggregated form, we need to highlight what the gaps are, what innovations we have or could have to be able to fill those, and why disaggregation matters. And finally, in the VNR, let's look to see what challenges there are around data and what we can be doing, what we can be planning to do to improve national data capacity. What strategies there are, what partnerships need to be made to be able to have good measurement and therefore reporting on progress on the SDGs to do with children, and all of this woven into the national statistical master plans that the countries have. If you ever need more, please get in touch with us, data@unicef.org. Thank you.
Good. I'll come to the working media. Thank you, Mark. Very strong points on the critical importance of data in this process. Let's go to number 5. So I'm going to give it over to Moa for climate change and environmental degradation as a child rights issue. Moa. 3 minutes.
Super. I'll I'll try to keep to the 3 minutes. Yes, my name is Moa Cortobias, and I work with the Latin American Regional Office on the climate change, environment, energy, and disaster risk team. So I will be speaking mainly about environment and climate issues, but please keep in mind that we really speak about all of these different aspects related to child rights. So I'm again bringing you a cross-cutting issue and one of the systemic risks to child rights. And I really want to first start off with pitching to you why this is such a key issue to consider in the VNR process, but in really any program work or any investments or efforts towards realizing the child rights. So one of the first things that we know is that the climate crisis is here. The climate crisis is a child rights crisis. For example, we know that 88% of the additional disease burden is going to fall upon children below 5 years. 93% of children under 15 or children in youth under 15 are breathing toxic air, and there is a lot of data showing how children are disproportionately affected both by environmental degradation and by the climate crisis. As has been mentioned over or before by my colleagues, climate change also affects disproportionately those children that are already living in poverty, that live in areas that are marginalized, or don't have access to the services that they need. UNICEF, together with our partners in different countries, are working in a number of ways in positioning child rights within the climate change and environmental, energy, and disaster risk agenda. But there is much more that needs to be done. One thing that we work on is strengthening the key social services that children need. to survive and thrive. And we are calling on all our partners and donors to work together with us and work together with children and youth to make sure that child rights are at the center of any climate and environmental.
1 minute more.
Yes, thank you. Yes. So why? What are some of the key challenges? Well, as I mentioned, social services are generally not resilient to the impact of disasters. Climate and disaster and environmental policies and programs generally don't consider children. Also, as has been mentioned before, young children, adolescents and young people are not seated at the table when decisions are made, and they are often not part of the investments and initiatives. There is also very limited data and knowledge related to what are solutions that would benefit children. So what needs to be done? Well, we need to strengthen the sustainability of the services and making the markets more sustainable. We need to ensure that policies and programs are child sensitive, and we need to make sure that children, adolescents, and young people are at the table when decisions are made. What is the opportunity? Well, if we do this together, then we have the possibility to support 4.2 billion children that will be born over the next 30 years and who will be facing the most harshest climate challenges. We can together protect the most vulnerable children, and we know that there is a strong return on investment. If we invest $1 in increasing resilience, then that prevents us from having to spend between $30 and up to $50 on recuperating communities, recuperating systems. And we really believe that the VNR process is one of those opportunities to help the government, help civil society, and help us all to really highlight what are those actions that are still missing, how can we move together on this, and how can we improve for a safer and more sustainable future for children. Thank you.
Thank you, Moa. Thank you for those nice outlay of the issue of climate change and environmental degradation. Very key messages. So the last one, let's go to Nazila, business, children, and the SDGs. How to engage the private sector. So Nazila, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So my name is Nazila. I work with the multi-stakeholder partnerships team in the division of private fundraising and partnerships, and I will share with you some of our key asks and a general overview of how we can strengthen the role of the private sector in the VNR process for the SDGs and children. So starting with the big picture, we know that most VNR actually fail to provide a comprehensive picture of SDGs implementation, and there are many reasons, but one of them is the weak engagement of the private sector. If we look specifically at the VNR of last year, what we see on the positive side is that 86% of the analyzed VNR reports actually recognize the need for private sector investment, and this is actually double the level that we reached in 2020. Less positively, we can also observe that the number of countries actually consulting the private sector as part of this VNR process has fallen to the lowest level since 2016. And this represents 76% of the VNR. So 3 in 4 countries actually engage the private sector. So there is a positive trend that demonstrates that there is a clear understanding of the importance and the important role of the private sector in this process, but it is really not enough that only 3 in 4 engage the private sector. What we see also quite interestingly is that multi-stakeholder approaches and platforms have emerged as a powerful mechanism to engage in a whole of society, whole of government consultation process. And as part of this mechanism and platform, we see that 83% of the VNR last year are referencing public-private partnerships. However, where we want to pay more attention is on the stakeholder engagement practices. And this is also linked to what my colleague Kate and others have said before me. We need to ensure that these mechanisms are meaningful and capture all voices and contribution, and in particular the ones of the youth, vulnerable youth, and this in a transparent and fair process. Equally important, as member state and partner recognize the importance of the business sector and the realization of the SDGs, is to ensure that both the direct and indirect, as well as positive and negative impact of businesses on children and the SDGs is included. And here we see that the private sector has a tendency to focus on the positive and ignore the negative, and ignore even more some of the indirect negative impact of their operation across, for instance, their supply chain. And we see now more focus of different stakeholders and organizations that are trying to put a spotlight on that and trying to bring private sector to this importance of conducting human rights due diligence and having the rights mechanism in place. Thank you. Finally, we should also try to identify the right incentive for companies. And this is a role that government needs to play, of course, and this across small and medium-sized enterprises, all the way to multinational corporations. What could be some of these mechanisms for them to join this multi-stakeholder platform, to join this mechanism for the VNR and the SDGs? And here, for instance, we can name the need to align business with national priorities, the need to strengthen the license to operate, the need to build resilient business model. And while the SDGs are not legally binding, they do reflect this shifting stakeholder expectation. And it's likely that governments will continue to introduce policies, regulations, and laws. And so there is really an incentive for companies to integrate that in their corporate strategies ahead of these being implemented. I'll pause here, just point you to these two documents, the key ask on business children and the SDGs for 2022, where you can find more, and also the document with the analysis and the trends that include some of the trends I mentioned today, and invite you to join the breakout session if you'd like to discuss this further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nassila, and very succinct, very good on the role of the private sector. So now you have already heard the 6 pitches, and now we're going to go into breakout rooms. And it's very important that you, for the moment, have in mind which breakout room you want to join. If you want to join 2, don't panic, because we will record every single breakout room will be recorded. Sentence that summarizes in 30 seconds, you know, the main highlight of what you discussed. Remember, these will be recorded, so no need to give us a summary. Just a sentence of what you felt in the meeting. And then I'm going to give the floor quickly to 2 colleagues to close the meeting. So let me start quickly with Manel on child rights, 1 sentence summarizing the discussion. Manel.
So perhaps over to Hannah, if you'd like to do that. Hannah was the reporter.
I will try to be quickly. We spoke about data disaggregation and different data sources for data collection on children's rights, also specific mechanisms and legal frameworks specific on children's rights, children laws, or children's rights coordinators, also about holistic approach, and of course about including voices of children at first in all these systems.
Thank you, Hannah. Very succinct, very informative. That was a great summary. Test for the other groups. Let's go to Sola and Jennifer on public financing.
We had actually some very similar themes come out. There was some excellent points about the importance of collaboration, about working across agencies, the One UN approach, engaging with civil society as well as with government to identify evidence from multiple sources, and then where evidence doesn't exist, to use this as an opportunity to engage with government to emphasize the importance of being able to demonstrate their commitment, and then also how to use the narrative structure to display and demonstrate progress. And we also touched on the importance of child representation and the case of Zambia, who used child representation also to demonstrate some of these issues.
Excellent summary. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Let's go to number 3, meaningful child and youth awareness, engagement, and action. Kate.
Thank you. And thank you to my group for sharing their varied experiences working with young people. A lot of great experience of working with vulnerable groups of young people. So that was one of the themes of the discussion. We also spoke about working with certain decision makers at the community level, for example, who traditionally are not used to creating spaces for children and young people to participate, and how important that is. And one of the key, I think, themes that came out as well in our group is how, some of the challenges on working directly with children and young people, particularly when they come from very vulnerable and marginalized groups and have very critical needs when it comes to shelter and education and food and health, access to that as well. We didn't have, I think we only had one person in the group who had directly worked on a VNR before, but a lot of interest and a lot of experience that can be applied to working in the VNR process. So that's a summary from group 3.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's go to data. Mark.
Thank you, and thanks to the group for everything, and thanks to Abdul Razak for being rapporteur. Over to you, Abdul
Razak. Thank you so much. We have discussed some challenges related to the disaggregation of the data. The first question was how can we address the discrepancies between the data produced by the government and the other institutions. There were some concerns of that, because when you compare some data produced by the government with the other data produced by the other institutions, you see there are some differences between the two data. So what the recommendation that comes stronger was to follow the rules of the official statistics data. The second question was how can we capacitate the national human institutions that are working human rights in understanding the data collection processes for monitoring the child rights. So we discussed that it's important the national importance of the data and to follow up the data so that we can make some progress on the rights of the children. The third question was about
to finish, Abdul Razak. Just wrap it up because we have to continue.
Yes. The other question was the usage of the big data as an innovative way. So it was mentioned that we can use the data of big data for some issues, but we want to, for example, like the poverty, but we need to triangulate the data with the other sources of the.
I'm sorry, Abdul Razak, but I have to stop you right now because we have to continue. Thank you very much for that summary. Moa, a one-liner, please, on climate change and environmental degradation.
Yes, well, actually, Florence has volunteered to be our reporter.
Florence, one-liner.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, actually, we did mention on our site the importance of the climate change policy update, a regular, constant update on the population based on these policies. We also did mention the importance of government to constantly work on bringing in the youth into all those policies that we're currently working on. Same as well, the importance of creating a special department that could follow up on these children's rights, and same as environmental changes. That's constantly most of the thing mentioned in our.
Thank you. No, very good summary. Very quick and very to the point. Thank you so much. Nasila, business and children.
Thanks, and thanks to Naeem for the two sentences summarizing our discussion.
Thank you very much. The private sector it's really challenging to engage private sector, and it depends on the context and so many things to really get a meaningful engagement, not only in the implementation of SDGs, but also in the process of the VNR and the child rights. So the discussion mainly revolves how to get the maximum from the private sector in order to get the really reflection in the VNR. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, you get a flavor of the groups. So we finished this with two quick statements for our session. First, I'm going to give the floor to colleagues of Madagascar for some headlines on their experience on the VNR. And then I'm going to give a word to Arelis Bellorini from World Vision to wrap it up at the end. So let's go to our colleagues from Madagascar. Some headlines.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Andres. My name is Erica. I'm the Chief of Social Policy at UNICEF Madagascar. We participated to the VNR process last year, and I will say two main headlines. First, mix can really make a big difference in the preparation of the VNR report. We completed mix just before the VNR, and we were able to inform 11 SDG goals with mixed data, and about 75% of the indicators the government of Madagascar is reporting on. And in addition to that, we also did a child poverty report endorsed by the government that the government then used to report on child poverty for the first time in the VNR report. Second headline is about the use of evidence. And in preparation for the VNR, we conducted a training with government officials to sensibilize them on the importance of using evidence in reporting through the VNR process about what works and what doesn't. And then we did for the first time an evaluation synthesis of all evaluations conducted in Madagascar in the years before. And we were able to inform through the result of those evaluations what works and what doesn't for 5 SDG goals. So this ended up being a separate report that informed also the VNR report in terms of which policies, which programs we should continue because they're having actually a positive impact on children and the population. So I just wanted to share those, and I will put the VNR report and also the evaluation synthesis in the chat. Thanks.
Excellent, Erica. Thank you for those final reflections. And to finish today's sessions, we have 2 minutes to listen to the reflections of Arelis Bellorini from World Vision. So Arelis, you have the floor for some final reflections.
Thank you so much, Andres, and hello, everyone. Just to briefly say that, as you can all see here, both UNICEF at all levels and civil society organizations that are present here, mostly child-focused organizations, are ready to support you in this significant major endeavor. We know that developing a VNR requires a whole process that possibly takes a full year of your government's involvement and engagement. From the World Vision side, we have developed a guidance note. It's a technical note that provides some guidance on how to mainstream children, particularly their rights and their needs, across the report based on the Secretary General's guidelines. We have seen, fortunately, an increased number of VNR that are including or that are basing their reports on the Secretary General's guidelines, which are voluntary. And this guidance that we have goes section by section, providing technical inputs on how you can reflect children and their rights in those sections. And we have those also in several languages. So we're ready to support you, and just reach out. We have offices across all the regions, and yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, Andres.
Okay, thank you for these wrap-up comments and offer. So, colleagues, we're pretty much done. The only thing I ask you as you exit our VNR clinic is that you fill the survey so we can make these VNRs as better as possible. I understand that my colleague Jennifer will put a link with a survey in 4 languages. So you can pick the language of your choice, and you know, in Spanish or in French, whatever. And please, Russian, please fill it up and send us your comment. Meanwhile, I just want to thank you very much and thank colleagues in my team, Shannon, Annalisa, Jennifer, and the others for all the support, as well as Eric, who's been supporting technically with Geraldo, all of this happening. Please fill the survey and have a great day.